In our last two sessions, we have talked about our core values, Indigenous principles, and discipling or mentoring. In this session, we want to talk about committed relationships as a core value. Committed relationships. We found that all around the world, in every culture, committed relationships are one of the keys to a successful ministry. Billy Graham had one of the most successful evangelistic ministries of his day, and Cliff Barrows and George Beverly Shea all worked closely with him for 55 or 60 years. They were a tight-knit bunch. They had a commitment. They lived out committed relationships. Marinell and I have been able to work with some of the same people for 30, 32, 33 years. We've served with other people since the early 70s, people we've known, and have good, close, strong relationships with them. I'm not saying that, if you end up coming into WIM that you'll spend the rest of your life as a WIM missionary, but while you're in WIM, we hope you will be able to give yourself to others and make developing relationships a priority. Committed relationships. It involves fellowship, spending time together. God works through relationships. God speaks to you through relationships. God meets your needs through relationships. And probably if we took a toll here, how many people came to this orientation because of relationship that you have with someone in WIM, Most everybody that comes into WIM because they have a relationship with a WIM missionary or someone in WIM. We get very few people walking off the streets. It's all about relationships. I know in the early 80s, Glenda Morris and Maurice Morris attended a church in Oak Grove, and at that time they met Walter Fleming. And Walter Fleming was one of the founders of WIM. And it was through that relationship with Walter that eventually Glenda and Maurice ended up coming into WIM. Glenda and Jim Kefauver have known each other since they were 9 or 10 years old. And they lived in the same community, attended the same school. Sometimes they went to the same church. And many, many years later, Jim and Ruth was sitting behind Glenda and Maurice when God confirmed their call into missions. And now Jim is working with Glenda and Maurice. Jim and Ruth are. It's about relationships. Developing and maintaining long-term relationships. The Bible exhorts us to walk in love. And it's the love of God that holds these relationships together. It's the love of God that's going to cause you to have that commitment to others. It's all about God's love. Relationships all about God's love. Because love demands that we lay down our life for one another, dying to self, denying yourself, putting others first. It's the foundation for strong relationships. You need to have the love of God to get you through some of the interpersonal conflicts that you're going to have on the mission field. Because a lot of missionaries, most missionaries, are strong-willed and determined, and you will butt heads with them. And it's that love and that commitment to one another that will help you to forgive them and continue to work with them. At one time, I don't know if it is now, but at one time, the number one reason people left the mission field was because of interpersonal conflicts in their relationships. Not being able to get along with one another. Having conflicts with others. But one of the qualities of a good leader and a good missionary is being able to get along with other people. Being able to see their point of view. We found out too that if you pray together, that really helps the commitment and that relationship to become stronger and stronger. The people we trained and the people that trained us and the others that we walked with, we prayed together. And that really made our relationship tight. I had one friend, I'll call him Billy, that I served with in missions. In fact, he asked that I baptize him. He had been a Christian for a long time, but he had never been baptized. He had been baptized as a Catholic, but not as a evangelical. So he asked that I baptize him, and we were close. We worked, did evangelistic crusades. We trained leaders. We worked throughout Europe and Asia together, and we were tight. And I enjoyed some of the best fellowship I ever had with that particular man. But we had a sharp disagreement, and the relationship was broken. And I've never been able to reconcile it. And it hurts, you know, it hurts. On the other hand, I had a brother that I worked with before I came to the mission field, and I was his associate. I was an associate pastor of his, and we butted heads and really had to part. But over the years, we were able to forgive one another, and now he and I enjoy some of the sweetest fellowship ever, you know. If we're going to have committed relationships, we're going to have to humble ourselves and love one another, ask forgiveness, and continue on. You know, communication is part of building a relationship. Not only love, but communication. And one of the men who discipled me, Dr. Bill Thomas, he said, if we don't communicate with one another, the devil will fill in the blanks. I know with your husband or with your wife or with your close friend, if you don't communicate with one another, the devil will fill in the blanks. So clear communication is so important if we're going to have strong relationships. A careful reading of Acts, especially Acts 12, Acts 15, we find that there was a big disagreement between the Apostle Paul and John Mark. John Mark, we think, was the cousin or relative of Barnabas. And when Paul and Barnabas went on that missionary tour, they took John Mark with them. But for some reason, in the middle of the trip, John Mark decided he wanted to go back home. And Paul didn't like that. And so the next time they started out, Barnabas wanted to take John Mark, and Paul says, no, I'm not taking him. He didn't go with us last time. He left before the trip was over. I'm not taking him. And he wouldn't work with him anymore. So what happened, Barnabas took his cousin, John Mark, with him, and he went in that direction. And Paul took Timothy or Silas, and went in that direction, you know. But the good thing about it, at the end of his life or at some later date, they were reconciled. Because Paul told Timothy, he said, bring Mark with you because he's useful to me, he said. Then later on he refers to Mark as my fellow laborer and my co-worker. So they were reconciled. They had a commitment to one another. So as WIM missionaries, we believe that God desired that we commit ourselves to Him and to one another. Because of God's commitment to us, we strive for committed relationships with one another. So I want to encourage you to be committed to developing and maintaining strong relationships.